Okay, so our Mishnah, which we started, said that if the woman was in a case where it is likely assumed that she is not a virgin, then someone who would rape or seduce her would not pay the knas, the fine of 50 silver pieces. And basically, a convert or a girl who had been a captive or a shifcha who was freed at the age greater than 3 years old in one day. So we assume that they were no longer a basula, no longer a virgin, etc., like that. So there's no knas. The knas is for the loss of the virginity. But Rabbi Yehuda's opinion was a captive that redeems, she's with her kedusha. So basically, we learned in the first parak about shvuya. We were learning the halachas. If she comes and said, I was captive, or was in the second parak, I was captive, but I was not secluded with a non-Jew, so she's believed. But if there are witnesses that she was captive, then she's not believed, because we say hapesha because she has a megu, because she could have not said anything. So the fact that she told us that she was held captive, we don't hold it against her. It gives her certain credibility, because she could have said a better claim. That's one of the ways to understand a megu. So if we start here on 36b3, the top of the second column, Amar le Abaye, we may have done a few lines above here, and we may have done this. Amar le Abaye, Utame de Rabbi Yehuda hachash lo yehe chote niskar. If the reason of Rabbi Yehuda is that a sinner will not benefit, meaning we're not going to say, oh, because he happened to if someone would rape a woman who had been a captive, we're not letting him off scot-free, because it would kind of be a way for certain unscrupulous individuals to start engaging in this activity and not have to pay 50 shekel. So he's a sinner. He shouldn't benefit from being exempt from the 50 shekel just because she had been held captive and there's no other evidence that she's not a basula. But Tanya, is that really the reason of Rabbi Yehuda? But Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda, Amar shvuya shenishbis arei b'ktushasa. Rabbi Yehuda himself said a woman who is held captive, stays in her state of kedusha, even if she would be 10 years old, which is much older than the age of 3 years old in one day, she still gets 200 zuz for her ksuva, like a regular basula. And what does that a sinner shouldn't benefit have anything to do with his halacha there? So Hasamnami, so he said, no. The reason there are also Dilma Mimanev lo Nasbila. If people would know that her ksuva was only 100, they might say, it's true that it's a cheaper ksuva to pay her, so I'd rather marry someone else. So I think I used the contemporary phrase. He wanted to help the shidduch crisis. He didn't want there to be a shidduch crisis for girls who had been held captive. People would think that there was something wrong with them, and that the ksuva was only 100 and not 200. So he says, no, the ksuva is still 200, to make sure these girls will be able to get married when they get a little older. The Sava Rabbi Yehuda b'ktushasa kaima. Does Rabbi Yehuda really hold, like he said in the Mishnah, that the shvuya stays in her? We assume that she is still kedusha. She's still in her state of kedusha. She wasn't defiled. But we learned in the Brisa, hapodas shvuya yisa'ena. If someone redeemed a female captive, he could marry her. Made ba lo yisa'ena. But if he testified that she had been held captive, but it doesn't look like she had been that she was not secluded with the non-Jew, so she keeps her status of being a basula. Lo yisa'ena, he can't marry her. That's what the Brisa says. Rabbi Yehuda Amar ben kach ben kach lo yisa'ena. Rabbi Yehuda says either way, he's not allowed to marry her. So this makes it sound like the opposite, that Rabbi Yehuda holds that we do assume that she was violated by the captors. That's the opposite of what he's holding in our Mishnah. So hagu fakasha. So this halacha, there's a difficulty with it. Amart hapodas shvuya yisa'ena v'hadar tana made v'lo yisa'ena. it said that if you redeem the captive woman, you're allowed to marry her. If you testified, you're not about her that she wasn't secluded with the non-Jew, you're not allowed to marry her. Mishum demeid b'lo yisa'ana, because he testified he doesn't marry her. If anything, it should be the opposite. If he's testifying that she wasn't that they had eyes into the compound where binoculars, whatever, to where she was being held captive, and they saw that she wasn't secluded. So better that she wasn't secluded. If you redeemed her, you may have not even know. I mean, this isn't exactly what the Gemara is asking. I mean, the Gemara doesn't say word it in those ways, but that could be a way of interpreting the question. Just redeeming, but it does seem that is what the Gemara is asking, at least according to Rashi. If you redeem her, you may not know if she was violated or not. Here, when you know she wasn't violated, you're not allowed to. Now, it doesn't say. It doesn't say, is it a difference if it's a Kohen or not a Kohen? Because if it's not a Kohen, well, he's allowed to, a non-Kohen would be allowed to marry her anyway. What's the only Shaila? The only person she would be restricted from marrying would be a Kohen. Because if a non-Jew had relations with her, she would have the status of a Zona, which we discussed a few months ago, which is Zona, the halachic status of Zona, not the translation of Zona that you would look in the dictionary. So I guess the question, would be that if a Kohen would have redeemed her or testified about her, because there would be no Isser at all for Yisrael to marry her anyway. So what would be the problem? It must only be a Kohen. So the Gemara says, "Holo kasha." That's not a question. Hachi kamar. This is what the Brisa is saying. Shvuya umeid ba yisa'ana. If he redeems her and he testifies that she was not held captive, that she was not secluded with the non-Jew, he's allowed to marry her. Made bakidi. But if he only testified about her and he didn't redeem her, someone else redeemed her, lo yisa'ana, he's not allowed to marry her. So Rashi says, if he redeemed her and he married her, and he testified that she was not secluded with the non-Jew, he's allowed to marry her, because he wouldn't have, if he wouldn't be allowed to marry her, he wouldn't have spent the money to pay her ransom. But if he only testified, maybe he doesn't know if she's really, if she had been secluded or not with the non-Jewish captors, and he just wants to marry her, so he's testifying her. But he wouldn't put his money, but the fact that he's putting his money behind him, if he would have redeemed her, ransomed her from the non-Jews, that gives his eidos more credibility. And I think there's a line, we'll see in a few more lines that we saw in the first parak that in regard to claiming that she wasn't a virgin, it wouldn't have been done by him, because he wouldn't have spent money on the Suda if he would have known that she wasn't Basula. The fact that he spent money makes it sound like he thought that she was permitted to him, or she would. So the fact that he's putting out money, it would be because he thinks there's no problem. It gives him more credibility. We'll see something along that lines in a few more lines. Mikol Makom Kashla Rabbi Yehuda. But nevertheless, okay, now that we did interpret this brisa, that brisa contradicts Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah. This brisa says Rabbi Yehuda says whether he ransoms her or not, and just testifies, he's not allowed to marry her. But our Mishnah says just because she was captive, she stays in her kedusha. That's the exact opposite of what Rabbi Yehuda says in that brisa. So Amar Papa Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Benkach Yisa'ana. So Rav Papa answers this question by changing the girsa of the brisa. Instead of, in the brisa, the Tanakama held if he ransomed her, and now according to the Gemara's question, it's if he redeemed her and testified for her, he can marry her. If he only testified, he's not allowed to marry her. Rabbi Yehuda says either way, he's not allowed to marry her. So Rav Papa changes the Rabbi Yehuda's opinion to say either way, he is allowed to marry her. Even if he doesn't pay her ransom, he only testifies in her behalf, he is allowed to marry her, because we assume that she was not violated by the captors, and so a Kohen is allowed to marry her. So Rabbi Papa changes this, explains the contradiction by changing the text of the Brisa, that Rabbi Yehuda would have a more permissive opinion than the Tanakama, not a less permissive opinion than the Tanakama. Rabbi Huna Breda, Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Yeshua, gives a different answer. To resolve our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda is more permissive to marry this captive than the Brisa, that he's not Liolam Kidiktani. So don't change the Brisa. The text of the Brisa stays the way it was. Rabbi Yehuda Ledivrehem de Rabbanan Kamer Lahu. Rabbi Yehuda is not arguing from his own opinion. He's saying, Chachamim, according to you, you should say that the Redeemer or the person who testifies that she wasn't secluded with the non-Jewish captors are not allowed to she's not allowed to marry the Kohen. But his personal opinion, Rabbi Yehuda's personal opinion is, in both cases, he is allowed to marry her. But according to you, you're assuming that the captive woman was violated by the non-Jewish captors. You should have said either way, you're not allowed to marry her. So he's saying that he's arguing the Tanakama not for his own opinion. He's saying, according to Chachamim, according to your own opinion, you should say that in both cases he's not believed and shouldn't be allowed to marry this redeemed captive. So the Gemara says, Rabbanan Apodos shvuya made by Yisa'ena. So why did the Chachamim allow him to marry her when he redeemed her and testified? Why did the Rabbanan not say the way that Rabbi Yehuda thought they should say? Because the Gemara says, a person wouldn't spend the money for nothing. But but if he only testified about her and didn't put his money behind him, he didn't ransom her, she was already ransomed by someone else, then we're just saying, oh, he wants to marry her, so he's just giving a testimony that would allow her to be muteres to him because he's a Kohen. But again, if he would have actually spent the money to ransom her, that gives more credibility that she really is permitted for him, because he wouldn't have spent the money to do something which wasn't mutter to him. Okay, so now we are on the last 7 lines of the Amud. Rami le Rapapa bar Shmuel Rav Yosef. Rapapa, the son of Shmuel, asked a question to Rav Yosef about Rabbi Yehuda. V'sav Rabbi Yehuda, as we turn the page, V'sav Rabbi Yehuda b'ktushas kaima. Does Rabbi Yehuda really hold that this woman is assumed, or this girl, because it could be a woman, it could be a girl over the age of 3 years and 1 day? Does Rabbi Yehuda really hold from our, as our Mishnah says, that we assume that she's in her state of kedushin, was not defiled by the non-Jewish captors of Hatana? But we learned in the Brisa, Hagirosh and Isgaira v'ras Adam. So it's a very if a woman converted to Judaism and then she saw blood, so Rabbi Yehuda Omer Dayashaita. So Rabbi Yehuda says that we assume that she became a nida, that this blood is from her uterus, and she is now a nida, and it came from right now. And if she would have touched, let's say, truma an hour ago or 23 and a half hours ago,
how would she touch truma?
She's not Jewish yet. But let's say Kohanim could have Kohanim could have their slaves and servants, the non-Jewish slaves and servants, so they own them. It's not like a Jewish slave you don't own. They are allowed to eat truma. So even though they're not Jewish, they'd be allowed to eat truma. So there must be some type of so before her conversion. So it's a case. So this doesn't necessarily mean that she ate truma. It could have been that if she ate it, it's not around anymore. But what if she touched it? If she touched truma and she was not tahora, then the truma is now impure, and you're going to have to burn it to make sure that no one eats it. So Rabbi Yehuda says daya shaita. We just assume that that the flow came now, and we don't have to worry if she touched, let's say, anything impure within the last 24 hours. we don't assume that she was a nida then. So anything, if she happened to have touched truma, it's still tahora. Rabbi Yossi Amar Harei Kechal Anashim. But Rabbi Yossi says she is like any other woman, meaning someone who, as if she didn't just convert. And she would become tame for retroactively if she would have touched truma 24 hours previously. We assume that truma is tame, umipkita or pkita is remembering to remembering, but this would mean if she would have examined herself. So let's say she had examined herself for blood 12 hours ago and it was clean. So we could assume that up until 12 hours ago, she was clean, but maybe the flow of nida blood happened right after she checked herself. So that's what Rabbi Yossi says. Rabbi Yehuda, and she needs to count 3 months. These are words of Rabbi Yehuda. So let's say the halacha is a divorced woman has to wait 3 months before she can get remarried, because we want to know who the father is. Because halachically, it could take 3 months to notice that she's pregnant or not. In those days, they didn't have pregnancy tests. So the actual halacha is they have to wait 94 days before they're allowed to remarry. So a woman who converted also, we would say she would have to wait these 3 months or 94 days before she could get married. In case she's pregnant from before, we want to be able to know that the baby was conceived after she was Jewish. Or we want to be able to make sure that the baby, what we would know if she would have a baby, let's say 7 months later, we'd be able to know that it's either it's an early, if it's an early baby, maybe it's a 7-month baby, she gave birth early, and maybe the baby was conceived after she was converted. But if it's a 9-month baby, that means that the baby was conceived before she was Jewish. So we want to be able to know. So Rabbi Yehuda requires that if she converts, we have to wait this time. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yossi allows her to get engaged or married immediately. So here we're assuming that this Giores might be pregnant. So in our Mishnah, the case of Giores and prisoner and Shifcha, who was redeemed, are listed together. So if he would assume that the Giores maybe would have been pregnant, so he should also assume that the captive woman maybe also would have been pregnant. And how would she have become pregnant? From her captors. So that brisa seems to conflict with our Mishnah, but there's a simple answer, which the Gemara says. Amar lei, Rav Yosef answered, Gioris shvuya karames, Gioris lo mantra nafshe, shvuya mantra nafshe. Are you going to ask a question between a convert and a captive? The Gioris, because she wasn't Jewish before her conversion, she wasn't careful about refraining from premarital sex. But shvuya mantra nafshe, but the prisoner, she was careful. So it's a completely different situation. Now, nowadays, we wouldn't hold like this, because, I mean, obviously, you couldn't do a gerus if the person didn't know parts of the mitzvahs. And nowadays, the gerus process, we actually, but they didn't test the meet with besides for the candidate, the gerus candidate having their rabbi who they actually learn from, and their sponsoring rabbi, the Beis Din meets with them usually at least 3 times and tests them on stuff. So there is a certain level of knowledge. I'm just saying nowadays, if a gerus, a candidate, would come and suddenly pop up pregnant and was single, it would be an issue for several reasons. So then Rav Papa Bar Shmuel continued his question. Well, ask a contradiction between captive and captive. Titania, because in a different brisa, Hagiras v'shvuya shenifcha sheniftiv shenisgav shenishtachri yiseres abin oshlam v'yom echad, a convert or a woman who had been held captive, and a slave woman who was a full non-Jewish slave, who then got freed and then becomes Jewish after she gets freed, who were redeemed or converted or were freed. Or when I said redeemed, I guess the better word is ransomed. When they're more than 3 years old in one day, they have to wait 3 months before they can get married, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi matur li'aras v'nasa miyad, but Rabbi Yossi allows them to get engaged and married immediately. So in that case, Rabbi Yehuda specifically says shvuya, a captive in this case. So we actually have an explicit brisa where he says captive. So you can't say, oh, captive and convert are different. So ishtik. So Rav Yosef was quiet. He didn't have an answer. Amar le mida shmiya l'cha b'ha. So he said, have you heard anything about that to answer this up? Was there anything, Midi, is there anything, that you heard about this issue or about this contradiction? Amar le, he said, Hachi Amar Rav Sheshis. Rav Sheshis answered, Sharuya Shenivala. The Bryce is talking about a case where they saw that she had, it says that she was Nivala, that she had cohabited. I don't know if it literally means cohabited, it just means they saw that she was secluded. So it seems that from here the Papa Rashpul was a Talmud of Rav Yosef, and therefore he asked Rav Yosef, but he already knew the answer. It's a little bit. So we hachi my time at Rabbi Yossi. So if we sharua shenivel, if they saw that she had cohabited with her captor, how could Rabbi Yossi say that she's allowed to marry right away? Rabba says, Rabbi Yossi says that a woman who is having an illicit relationship with someone uses some type of a diaphragm or something that would absorb the sperms, that she won't get pregnant. So yeah, we could believe that that she had cohabited with someone, but she's not going to conceive. In other words, she would have used birth control. So bishlam agioras kaven the daitalig yure minternafsha. So that we could understand this answer if it was regard to someone who is going to convert, because she's already decided to convert. She's going to minternafsha. She's going to guard herself. And shvuya nami delo yada hechemat mula. And also, she doesn't know what's going to happen to her because she's being held captive, so she should be careful. Shivchanami, and a slave woman also, the Shama Mipimara, she may have heard from her master that he's going to free her. So in that case, she is going to make an effort that she wouldn't become pregnant in the 3 months prior to her release. But there is a category of a slave woman who goes free from being, I think I mentioned about this at Shalshudas last Shabbos, that if one of the limbs, obvious and outstanding limbs, a finger, a tooth, an ear, a nose, a leg, a limb like that, or obviously an arm, but the Torah talks about just shein v'ayin. But the Gemara makes a drasha, anything that's like shein v'ayin, that you could see it and it's not going to go back, and it's so she'll go free. So in that case, she will not know that she's about to get injured on the job, or maybe so she wouldn't know that she's about to be freed. So she's not going to take any steps of birth control. So and if you want to say Rabbi Yossi is only talking about planned cases, not unplanned cases. So meaning someone who's converted is planning to convert, someone who the master is planning to free her. He probably would have told her, and so she knows about it. And shvuya doesn't know. Maybe she'll get freed the next day, maybe not. So she would take make the efforts also to make sure she wouldn't get pregnant in case her captors would have relations with her. So if you want to say, but Rabbi Yossi is not talking about spontaneous cases like being freed because the slave got injured from her tooth getting knocked out or eye getting knocked out or finger getting cut off. But the case of a woman who is raped or seduced, which is an unplanned thing, Vitanya, and we learned in a brisa, a woman who is raped or was seduced, they need to wait 3 months if they're going to marry someone else. These are Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yossi allows them to get engaged and married immediately. So Rabbi Yossi, this was obviously an unplanned thing, especially the case of Anusa, but probably also the case of Mafuta. And Rabbi Yossi, so that's again something that was unplanned, and yet Rabbi Yossi again is not worried that she might become pregnant, and that we should know whether she became pregnant from the first incident, which would have been the rape or the seduction, or from the second person, who would be the person that she married. So Elam Rabba, so Rabba answers because Rabbi Yossi Ish Mazana Misapachas Kadesh Lo Tisaber. Rabbi Yossi holds it's not about using let's say a prophylactic birth control, but she will turn over so that she won't get pregnant. So she didn't use birth control, but nowadays we would call it she used Plan B. But in that case, Plan B was Misapachas. ArtScrolls just seems to say that the ArtScroll note says she jerks her body so that the semen will drip out of her and not be absorbed into and impregnate her. So she's using gravity to get it out of her. It could be misapachas, might be she does something else to get it out of her, maybe more what's the word? More invasive than just literally turning over. So even if she didn't take, she couldn't plan for it by taking the prophylactic a birth control, but there's what we would call nowadays a Plan B, a post phylactic. I think that's not a real word, probably. So why does Rabbi Yehuda say that he doesn't assume that she's going to do this, so he wants her to wait before marrying, so we know if the father was from the first guy or the second guy. So Rabbi Yehuda is worried that she wasn't able to get the sperm out well, and so she would get pregnant anyway, even though she was trying to do a post-phylactic birth control method. Okay, 2 dots. Shenamar v'lo ya'ason anosh yanesh. So the Mishnah said that if someone would have raped, let's say someone, a daughter, granddaughter, a stepdaughter, something like that, there's no knas because there's a death penalty because Beis Din kills the person, and the Mishnah says whoever gets killed with the death penalty does not pay mammon, because the pasuk says if there is not a death penalty, that's in the case of people fighting and the pregnant woman gets hit and miscarries. So if she wasn't killed from that, then the person who hit her has to pay for the loss of the pregnancy. So that's how we learn that there cannot be, you don't get death and another punishment. So the Gemara says, "V'hamei hachanafka." Is that the source? Do we learn it from here? Mehasam nafka. We learn it from a different pasuk. Kedei rishaso, mishum risha achas atam chayva v'yatam chayva mishum shtei rishayos. I think that's in this week's parsha. No, it's not in this week's parsha. But it's from Edom Zomimim. And when you hit the wicked person, and the shofet will call out or will decide and hit in front of him according to his wickedness with a number. You get 39 lashes. So Kedei Rishaso, according to his evilness, the drush on the pasuk says Mishum Risha Achas Atamachayvo via Tamachayvo Mishum Shtei Rishayos. You could only punish him for one Risha, for one act of Risha, not for 2. So I guess Risha So is a singular, one Risha, but he can't get 2 punishments for the same act. So that's the source. You don't get two punishments. How come the Mishnah said the source is v'lo yasan anoshi anesh? If there's no fatality, then you pay money. So the Gemara answers, one pasuk tells us, and that's the pasuk that our Mishnah uses, tells us when there's a death penalty and a monetary payment. Then you only get the death penalty. And the Kedei Rishaso tells us when you would pay Malkos and have to pay money. Because that pasuk is talking about Malkos, so you only get one Risha. You'll get Malkos, so you won't have to pay money. But Tzrichen, you need a pasuk to teach us both, that a death penalty and money, you need one limud for, and for Malkos, for lashes and money, you need a different teaching for. But Tzrichen, you need them both. When you're getting killed, I might think, because you're getting killed, it's such a huge punishment, you don't need any other punishment. But when you get lashes and pay money, since there's not such a high level of punishment, you're still alive, I might say that you would get both punishments. And if I would have only Kedei Rishaso, that if you would get lashes and pay money, that in that case you only get the one punishment, which usually is lashes. We saw at the beginning of the parak that hitting and what was the other thing? You explicitly have to pay money for, but usually you would get Malkos. Mishum de l'chamer isure. That's because it wasn't such a strict, since the penalty for that sin was only lashes, it's not such a strict penalty, you would also have to pay the money for your sin. Avomiso mama de chamer isure emalo. But when you have a death penalty, but if it only I think I didn't explain that. If the Torah would have only exempted you from paying money when there's lashes and death and a monetary payment, that's because you didn't do something that was so terrible. So because it wasn't so bad, we say that Malchus is a big enough punishment. But when you have a death penalty, you did such a terrible sin that there's a death penalty. If there's an additional punishment, you should get that too, because your sin was so terrible. I might think that there's no exemption from getting two punishments. Therefore, we need a pasuk, both psukim. The pasuk from that our Mishnah used, if there was no fatality, then you pay money, because that's to teach us that in a death penalty case you would not pay money, and that's what we need Kedei Rishaso to tell in the case of lashes, you also get exempted from money if you get the lashes. So then the Gemara says on the last line, Rabbi Meir da Amar Loka Mishalim Tarti Lamali. Rabbi Meir's opinion is that you can get lashes and pay. So Rabbi Meir says in the beginning of Makos, if you testified that someone owed someone money and they were found to be Eidim Zomamim, they have to pay the money like they wanted to, because that's the punishment of Eidim Zomamim, Kasher Zamam, like they planned. And they also would have to get lashes for giving false testimony. So Rabbi Meir holds that you can get lashes and have to pay a monetary payment. Tarti Lamali, why does he need two psukim? What does he learn from Kedei Rishaso? So Chada b'misa b'mamon. So one case is to tell us that if you have a death penalty and a monetary payment, you only get the death penalty. You don't have to pay the money. As we turn to Laman Zayin Amud Beis, the Chada b'misa malkos. And you still need another pasuk if you would have had a death penalty and lashes, not death penalty. So the first Gemara was about death penalty and monetary payment, and lashes and monetary payment. This is different. For Rabbi Meir, it's a death penalty and monetary payment, or a death penalty and lashes. And you need both of them. So Kedei Rishaso would be telling you, if you would have done something that there would have been lashes and death penalty, you only get the death penalty, you don't get both. And you need a pasuk for both cases. I might think that if you have a death penalty and a monetary payment, so let's say you killed this person because you stabbed them. So when you stab them, you also ruin their clothes. So in that case, one punishment is in his body because you're killing them. One is in his money that he has to pay back. Lo avdinan. But if a person would have done something for which they would get lashes and the death penalty, I would say give them both because lashes and death penalty are both taken against the person's body. We could consider that lashes and death is just an extended death penalty, and you can get both punishments. So the Gemara says this in other cases also that lashes is kind of similar to a death penalty. Or it's an abbreviated death penalty, but it's more similar to punishment of a death penalty than it is to a monetary payment. The Yashmin and Misa Malkus, and if we would have only known the exemption if someone gets a death penalty and lashes, and I would say that you can't get two punishments on your body. So we'll just give you the stricter of the two punishments on your body, so we won't lash you, we'll only kill you. But for death penalty and monetary cases, that one is in his only one of it is in his body, the death penalty, but the other, the payment is with his money. I might say that he can get two punishments because only one is against his body. We need a pasuk to exempt him from getting both punishments. Okay, now the Gemara is going to darshan some other psukim about kofer. Lo tzikhu kofer lenefesh yotzeach lamali. You cannot take an atonement payment for a murderous soul. So Rashi says this implies that you might have thought that if you're going to kill him, you don't charge him a monetary payment. So once we already have these psukim to tell us that you don't get a death penalty and something else, why would I have thought that he would pay money? So why do we need a pasuk to exclude something which is already excluded? The Amar Achmana lo sishkal mamona minei v'siftrei miktala. This pasuk isn't telling us that he would get two punishments, money and payment and misa. It's saying you're not allowed to charge him, you're not allowed to accept the payment from him to save his own life. Now, there's the famous story that they were going to. There was a communist in Brisk who shot at an effigy of the Tsar, and so they put him in jail. They were going to kill him, and Reb Chaim held up Kol Nidre to collect money and bring the money to redeem it. So he felt that it was a mitzvah to redeem that captive, because in that case, even though there was a death penalty, but if they'd give a big enough payment, in the Tsar's, I don't know how much the Tsar himself knew about it, but you're able to get him off from his death penalty, from death row. But in halacha, for if the Beis Din had to kill him, he's not allowed to pay money to avoid being killed. So it's not an exemption from payment. It's saying that there's a special issur that you're not allowed to take money to exempt him from death. So there are some cases where you pay kofer. So I think if your animal kills someone, you pay kofer. So it's machlokas, it demei nizik or demei mazik. If you pay based on the value of your life or the value of the victim who has killed life, and then there's even a machlokas rishonim. There's Ibn Ezra, and again, I don't remember the other opinion. Rav Yashaber brought it down in the Shiurim that some rishonim held that if you didn't pay kofer, you could be put to death. But I guess there's always time for you to pay kofer, so you wouldn't be put to death, because you could say, I'm gonna get the money together. But a different opinion says once you're chayav to pay kofer, you're exempt from death, even if you end up not paying the kofer. The fact that the Beis Din would levy a kofer against you, that reduces, but that's not a case where you killed yourself. But that's when a kofer payment does apply in halacha. So then there's another pasuk. Lo sikul kofer lenusal ir miklato. This was in Parshas Maaseh. You can't take kofer to flee to the Ir Miklat, the city of refuge. Lama li, why do we need that pasuk? The Torah there is saying that if someone killed someone accidentally and has to go to an Ir Miklat, the city of refuge, he's not allowed to pay money and be exempt from going to the Ir Miklat. So Trey Kray Lamali, why do we need a pasuk for manslaughter when you killed a person? Why do you need a pasuk for going to galus? That in both cases you're not allowed to pay kofer to get out of your punishment. Because one of them is talking about killing accidentally, that's about going to galus, and one is talking about when you killed intentionally. V'trichen, you need an exemption for both, or you need a prohibition not to accept kofer for both cases. Diashminan mezid. If the Torah would have only told us that if someone who killed intentionally and has a death penalty on him, we're not allowed to accept kofer from him. Mishum dechamer isure. That's because his sin was so great. The sin of murder is so great. Now, why is the sin of murder so great? So one opinion, one way to interpret it is because the punishment is a death penalty, which is the highest level of punishments. The Rogachover says something interesting. I think it's in Bamidbar somewhere in something that was published from after he died. I think the Rogachover says that murder is such a strict, terrible sin because it's not a one-time act. It's an act that continues forever. For example, when Moshe, back in Parshas Shemos, according to Kol Demei Achicha. No, it wasn't from Moshe. It was from Cain and Hevel. When Cain killed Hevel, the sin was so great. Hashem said, "Kol Demei Achicha." The plural, the bloods of your. I hear the bloods of your brothers. So what does that mean? So all the unborn descendants of Hevel who weren't able to be born are crying out. So the murder isn't just a one-time thing, but the prevention of those other generations from not being born is also an additional effect of the murder. So I think the Rogachover explains that's why the sin is so, a murder is such a terrible sin. Now, it's interesting, about a year ago, someone published the diary that Rabbi Fassman, Zichrono Livracha, Oscar Fassman, he went to Eretz Yisrael, I guess in the early 30s. And so he went through Europe first and met with different Rabbanim, and the Rogachover was one of the Rabbanim that he met. So obviously the Rogachover was alive then, but it's interesting that Rabbi Fassman met him, and I met Rabbi Fassman. So I saw someone who saw the Rogachover. So he wrote and in his journal he mentioned some of the sugya, that the topic that the Rogachover was talking about with them. I think the Reb Meir Simcha, the Or Sameach, who was the Rav of Dvinsk, and I think the Rogachover lived in Dvinsk also. The Rogachover said it's not that the Rogachover knows so much because he has a perfect memory. He's literally constantly learning. He's always going over Shas and Poskim, so he knows it because he just learned it. So murder is a very strict thing. So you couldn't pay to get off the hook. But killing b'shogeg, you go to near miklat, that's not so strict. So I might think that you can make a kofer payment and be exempt from galus. Therefore, you need a pasuk. You're not allowed to take kofer to exempt yourself from galus or to buy your way out of galus. The iashmin and shogeg, and if we only would have had the pasuk by galus, mishum deleka ibn neshama, I might think because there was no loss of life that you can't take it. But if you killed someone amazed because there was a loss of life, meaning in this case, because if we wouldn't accept kofer, we'd put this person to death. And even though he did a big sin, but the fact that we're killing a Jew, even though it's for cause, is a bad thing. So you might think that if someone could pay kofer, we'll keep a Jew alive. We know the Mishnah in Sanhedrin says that that saving a Jew is like saving the whole world. So even though the person was Rotzeach, but it might be important to keep a Jew alive. So therefore, we need a pasuk to say, no, if he deserves death, he's not allowed to pay his way out. Tzricha. Okay. So now this other pasuk, which is also in Maaseh about Er Miklat, you can't the land will not be atoned for with blood that was spilled on it, except with the blood who spilled it. Basically, you have to punish the person who did the Avera and not anyone else. The person who spilled the blood and not anyone else. So what do we need that pasuk for? We learned that the person who spilled blood has to get punished, and he can't pay money. So what are we learning additionally from this pasuk? We need it for about the halach in the following brisa. So in this week's parsha, at the end of Shoftim, we're going to learn about the Egla Rufa. If someone gets killed between two cities, we don't know who did it. They measure out the closest city. The elders of that city have to make a declaration, and they kill a young calf by chopping, using an axe and cutting its head off in a valley that will be fallow for all time. So that's because when we didn't know who killed him. What if they did the Egla roof already, and then they found the killer? Minayin shein potrin usa. How do we know that we do not exempt him? That he might think that because the Egla Arufa ceremony already took place, the kapara, the atonement for the sin, has already happened, and therefore he doesn't get punished. How do you know that that's not true? Shenamar, the pasuk says, because in the land will not be atoned for the blood that's spilled. When we find the person who spilled the blood, he has to get punished, even if the Egla Rufa ceremony would have already took place. But then the Gemara asks, so then how come part of the Egla Rufa says, and you will destroy the innocent blood, or you'll get rid of the innocent blood in your midst? So that is after that pasuk is talking about already after it seems to be that the elders have to say it, even though it's after the egla, the calf has been killed. We need that to teach us the following halacha. How do you know that people who get killed with the death penalty of sayef, which is being killed with a sword, how do you know that we kill them by cutting off their neck? Maybe you cut off their femur, and because you get the main artery over there, they're going to bleed out and die. How do we know that that's not a way to kill them? From this pasuk by Egla Rufa, we'll destroy the ones who spill innocent blood from your midst. All murderers or all spillers of blood are compared to Egla Rufa. Just like the Egla Rufa gets killed by its neck. So also people who kill, the punishment for murder is not skila, it's sayef. They get beheaded. So they get killed from their neck. But then where it says, but the Egla Rufa gets killed with an axe and from the back of the head, but the back of the neck. But here, when you would kill someone with sayef, it's from the front of the neck, underneath the chin. So we're not learning that from the Egla Rufa. So Avkan Bekofetz Mimul Oref. So Rav Nachman, Rabbi Baravua. Rav Nachman said the name of Rabbi Baravua. Amar Kra, the pasuk says, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha." If to love your brother like yourself, the Gemara makes a remarkable drasha, and it says in Sanhedrin also, Barlo Misa Yafe. You have to choose for him a nice death. Meaning when you kill them, it's not going to be a gory and a painful death. It's going to be a quick, and we're minimizing the pain. We're not saying there's no pain. So to have his head hacked off from the back would be more painful than being cut from the front. I mean, it's true, if you get from the back, you could paralyze them and they won't feel anything. But I guess to go through the vertebrae and the bones there, that it may not be so easy. So it's more painless to go from under the chin. So why do we need a pasuk that says anyone? So cherem, nowadays, if we say someone's in cherem, it means there was a ban put against him. There's no real bans nowadays. But cherem in the Chumash is something which was declared completely off limits. Like when they fought a war, or actually in last week's parsha, we saw the Erni Dachas, the city where the majority of the people worshipped Avodah Zarah. All of their property is banned. Or when Bnei Yisrael went to war in Parshas Chukas, they said if we beat these Canaanim, which I think were really Amalekim, they say V'hacharamti asareim, I'm going to make their cities cherem. Cherem means it's going to be no one's going to be allowed to it. So here, this person cherem means someone who already has a death penalty. So any cherem that a person who has been, basically with the death penalty cannot be redeemed. Rashi says that this lashon is talking about a murderer, or not a murderer, anyone who did an avera that has a misas beistin, and he brings a pasuk from Mishpatim Zoveach Lelokim Yacharam. So someone who brings a korban lelohim to an idol yacharam, which means he gets put to death. So how come anyone who has a death penalty on him, he cannot be redeemed? Lamali, we already know you can't pay kofer. So what is this pidyon? What would this redemption money be? Lamali, why do we need this pasuk? We need it for the following halacha. Someone who's being put to death, and someone else says, I'm making a vow for that I'm going to give the value of him to the Beis HaMikdash. That's called an erechin. Those laws in erechin are in the end of Sefer Vayikra. So if someone says, I'm going to pledge the value of his value to the Beis HaMikdash, minayin shlamar klum, how do you know that it's as if he said nothing? He doesn't know anything to the Beis HaMikdash. Is that guy who's being taken out to die, his life is literally worthless. Shenamar, the pasuk says, "Kol cherem asher chamina adam lo yipada," because a cherem can also be something which is given to the Beis HaMikdash. And in this case, Rashi points out that even though the word cherem means a death penalty, in this case, the word cherem is the word of hektish. You're giving it to hektish. So then when you're trying to make a donation to hektish based on this guy's value, his life is completely worthless. That if you're trying to give a value for this condemned guy, so I guess the first cherem means the monetary value of the guy that you want to give to the Beis HaMikdash. Asher yacharam, in that case, the person who's about to be put to death, mina adam lo yipade. He's not redeemable. There's no money that he's worth. So Yachal Av Kodem Shenigmar Dino Kain, and you might think that before, so let's say they arrested him, but he wasn't put on trial yet. So it was before the death sentence had been passed on him. Is that also the halacha that he has no value? Tamalamar min ha'adam, below kol ha'adam, from the man, but not all men. So basically, this drush is saying that some people have no value. And when did they have no value? If the death sentence was already put on them. So there is a drasha. I remember Rabbi Silver and Kirby Avenue was trying to find the source. I thought he couldn't find the source, but I think that there's a mechilta, that basically if you kill someone who already is a chayav misa, you would be exempt. You wouldn't be punished because he's considered a dead man already. So it's a similar here. Once he had the Gemar Din that based in passed the death sentence against him, he has no value. And someone else would say, I'm going to give the value of his life to the Beis HaMikdash. His life has no value because he's already sentenced to death. Another drasha, Rabbi Hanania ben. So this assumes that each person has his own value. A stronger person would have a bigger value than a weaker person. A younger person would have a greater value than an older person because of future earnings, whatever. But Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya Amar Nerech Mipnei Shedamav Ksuvim. Hai Kocher Mayavid Bey. Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya holds that such a person, he's being put to death, and someone says, "I want to give the value of his value of him to the base of Mikdash." There is a value because there's set values for a thing. So 43-year-old male, there's a set value. It doesn't matter that he's condemned to death or not. Hai Kocher Mayavid Lei. So what does Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya do with that pasuk? He needs it for the following brisa. Rabbi Shmuel ben Nosh, Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruch Omer Lefisha Matzinu L'Mumasim B'Dei Shemaim Shenos and Mamam Niskaper Lahem. Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruch, says, we found that people who get put to death by heavenly death, let's say someone who eats truma, a non-Kohen who eats truma, the basin doesn't kill him, but they have a heavenly death sentence. How do we know that they can give money and they can be atoned and they won't get put to death by Hashem? Shnemer im kofer yushas olav. So I gave a bad example. I gave a true case of mumasim b'dei shemayim, but I gave the wrong example because they don't get paid off with money. Rashi says if your axe killed someone, that it says you get put to death, but it doesn't say that basin kills you. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin that you can only get put to death if you killed with your hands, not if your property, your axe killed someone. So this is misa b'dei shemayim. So for that case, you pay a kapara, a kofer, and you don't get put to death. Or as I mentioned before, Rabbi Yashaber brought the Rishonim that once based, you don't even have to pay the kofer as long as Beis Din would say the value of the kofer that you would have to pay. You don't even have to pay it. Once kofer was instituted, you don't get put to death by mitzvah de shemayim. Shenemer im kofer yushas alav. So if a kofer is put on him, Yachal apidei Adam Cain, I might think that if the Sanhedrin put you to death, you could also pay a kofer to get off. Tamalomar cherem min ha'adam lo yipada. So if it's a death penalty from man, meaning from a flesh and blood based in, then lo yipada, you can't be redeemed. And that's only, and I know that stricter death penalties that wouldn't have, so some things that you would get kares for, let's say, if you did malach on Yom Kippur, or you ate blood, drank blood, that it's kares if you do it. If you did it by accident, you would bring a korban chata. So even though the Shabbos, being machal Shabbos, the penalty is skila, but if there was no warning and you wouldn't be put to death by Beis Din, there is a kares for being machal Shabbos also. So if you did it by accident, you would have to bring a korban chatas. So this might only be for strict deaths that there is no kapara if you did it by accident. But misos kalosh and nitnu shigason kapar minayin. How do I know that a more lenient, it's still a death penalty, but something that's considered a little bit more lenient, because if you did it by accident, you could bring a korban to atone for it. How do I know that you could pay kofer for those also? Tamalomer kol cherem. Any cherem. So then the Gemara asks, why don't you learn that out, already understand from the pasuk lo siku kofer, you can't take a monetary payment. That's a blanket statement of you can't take a monetary payment to save from a death penalty. Why do we need a special drasha? Lo sishkal mamona minei v'siftere. That the pasuk lo siku kofer means you can't pay money or accept money from him and then exempt him from the death penalty. Kol cherem lamali. So again, why do I need the pasuk of kol cherem, according to Rabbi Chanan ben Akavya? Rabbi Rachama, it's true. Rabbi Rachama says we still need that. Drasha saka daitach amina. I might have thought hani mila hecha dahargu derech aliyah shlonitna shigosel chapara. I might think that's true if you killed someone accidentally when I was going up the ladder. When you kill someone going up the ladder, you don't have to go to the air miklat because it's considered very, very accidental. And there's no galus at all. So since there's no galus at all, there's no way of so atonement maybe So there's no kofer for that. Hargo derech Yerida, the nitna shegosel kapara. But if I killed him and I was going down the ladder, and then I killed him going down, so in that case you would have to go to Gullus. The nitna shegosel kapara. In that case, when you killed by accident, there is kapara by going to Ner Miklat. Ema nishka mamona minevin ifterle. I might think you could take money and exempt him. Kamash Malan. So the Torah tells us that he still doesn't. Now this exactly doesn't. Now I don't understand this Gemara because we already learned that there's a special. You can't take kofer to exempt him from going to Galus, and derech Yerida goes to Galus. So Tosfos talks about this. So therefore, Tosfos says that we're talking about So Amar Le Rava said Hamid Tani Dvei Chizkiya Nafka, but we already know this halacha from Tana Dvei Chizkiya, which we saw a few blot ago. The Tana Dvei Chizkiya, the yeshiva of Chizkiya taught Maka Ado Maka Behema. I think this was in Parshas Emor. One pasuk says you kill a man, the other pasuk says if you kill a behema. Is it just like if you kill an animal, it doesn't matter if you did it intentionally or unintentionally, you have to pay. Whether you did it intentionally or unintentionally. When you're going down a ladder, whether you're going up a ladder. Or also, if you're, let's say, holding a stick, if you kill someone by accident as the stick is coming down, or as it's going down, it slips and you kill someone. That's different than if you're doing a backswing. If you're going up, that's derech aliyah. The general case is a ladder, but the Gemara in Makos also talks about a butcher. Sometimes they're holding the cleaver going up, sometimes it's going down, sometimes it's in front of them, sometimes it's behind them. So when you kill an animal, you don't have you always have to pay money. But when you kill someone, it doesn't matter intentional, unintentional, going up, going down. You don't pay money. You rather don't pay money. So, we're going a little too long. So we're not done with this is a question on Rami Bar Chama. So we'll have to leave it here. And God willing, next week.
Thank you.